Welcome to the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. This is the source for all things high adventure for scouts, scouters, and anyone else interested in promoting high adventure trips for our youth. You can find all kinds of great high adventure options for your scouts at highadventurescouting.com. We are constantly updating the list of cool trips, and we want your input on your best trip. Welcome, high adventure enthusiasts. We're excited, as always, to highlight a high adventure base on this edition of the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. Now, we have a little different type of podcast episode this time. Usually, I'm interviewing a high adventure base or something related to that. Now, this time, we're going to be talking about Philmont in this episode. Not from the perspective of Philmont, but from a lead advisor who just got back from a 12-day trek to Philmont. And I thought this would be a great hot wash of someone who just got back from Philmont, a fresh perspective. Today, we're joined by one of my favorite people, Bryan King. Bryan, thanks for joining us on the High Adventure Scouting Podcast.
Thanks, Rob. This is great to be here. Philmont was an outstanding time, so I'm excited to get to talk about some of the adventures that we got to enjoy and experience on the trails of Philmont.
Awesome. Now, Bryan is the immediate past Scoutmaster for my troop, Troop 85 in O'Fallon, Illinois. Now, he also led the most recent crew to Philmont. And I've been on countless campouts and other scout-related trips with Bryan, so I know his background very well. He also let me tag along on their last Philmont shakedown, which was awesome. And I found out I'm still in Philmont shape, so I got that going for me. So it's pretty good. Now, I just wanted to just run through a few things to give advisors going for the first time or they haven't gone for a while, just a recent idea of what this crew went through. You might have different opinions or different things, but this is just an overview of what they did. So I'd probably start out, early on. You're starting with the training hikes and getting your gear together and what you need and so on. So what kind of training hikes did you do, and what kind of training did you guys do to get you ready for it? And was it enough to get ready for that trek?
Yeah, Rob, thanks. Yeah, so to kind of lay the stage for our crew that we had 11 individuals go on our Philmont hike, seven youth and four adults. We were fortunate in the youth age, and I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but we had a good mix of ages. Kind of going into older scouts throughout the process. We had four of them at least that missed the hike because of COVID year in 2020. So they were a little bit older, a little bit stronger at this point in time. Our crew leader ended up being the youngest in our crew, just graduating 8th grade this year, going into his freshman year of high school. But the rest of the crew was crossing the ages of sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school. So an older crew, an experienced crew. And I say that also in the context of a physically ready crew. I don't think there were any youth in the crew that weren't physically ready for this trip, and all succeeded well there. So from a shape standpoint, this crew was ready. But prep work, one of the big lessons learned on that was laying out the plan early. If you can lay out your plan 8 to 12 months in advance, looking at your shakedown hikes, looking at your meeting times, because as you get into the 6 months prior, everybody gets busy. There's a lot of activities, and really setting that schedule early on to prepare everybody and everybody schedule their calendars. Shakedown hikes were a great prep. Rob, you mentioned our final graduation hike in Tomsock Mountain in Missouri, and really that was a good capstone for us. And the reason I would say why is one of the things we couldn't do in the Midwest, or we can't do in the Midwest, is we really don't get elevation. So you don't get a chance to do the elevation changes that you'd see at Philmont. Kind of a good analogy is the highest point we got on the Tomsock hike, and it was the highest point in Missouri, roughly 1,700 feet. So you can't do elevation, but I think you can make that up in distance a little bit. So really, really working some hills, working some distance was really important for the shakedown hikes, and really showed the importance of packing properly, having the right weighted pack, and how to hike as a crew. One thing I think I would have changed on this for us would be incorporating the crew gear from day one. And what I mean by that is, as we did our shakedown hikes, oftentimes the crew gear was there, and it was passed out to the individual crew members before we got on the trail. But once we got to Philmont, everybody got their respective crew gear, and that's what they hiked with for the full 12 days on the trail. Really laying out, you were familiar who had the bear bags, who had the carabiners for the bear, who had the extra bladders, who had, the pots and pans, so on and so forth. So, and as in the shakedown hikes, if we would have done that day one, I think it would have helped everybody with packing, and it would have helped everybody really lay out early on and identify who had what crew gear. So that was probably, a big lesson learned that I would recommend for another crew on that one.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I think when we went last year, we did. I probably would change some of our training hikes, but the last one being very difficult, a lot of hills as much as possible, some good mileage, incorporating everything you're going to do over the roughly 10, 11 days on the trail is pretty important, and making sure you're really comfortable with your gear. I mean, there's a lot of people I've seen talk about gear that, hey, should I take this? Should I take that? Well, try it out and see what you think. You may not want to take a chair. You may want to take a chair. You may not like your boots or shoes or whatever you want to go in, but you want to make sure to get some miles on it so you're prepared for that. So, uh, I'm curious on you guys took the train out to Philmont. I know not everybody. We actually drove for our trek, but you guys took Amtrak from Kansas City. We live in the St. Louis area, but they drove to Kansas City because that particular train is late all the time, and it was actually late getting into Kansas City. So you would have had to probably stay an extra day, I think. So, so what was the train transportation like for you guys?
So yes, yeah, Rob. So we did that. We ended up driving from St. Louis to Kansas City. We parked at the Union Station parking lot out there. One notable experience I want to say was a lot of fun on the trip out there was we stopped at Joe's Kansas City Barbecue there in Kansas City, and one of the planning factors was everybody had their BSA uniform on in our crew, and we really stood out there at the barbecue place. The manager came over and talked to us a couple times, and we got a little bit of a discount on our meal when we went up there as well. So kind of really standing out as a crew and representing BSA on that was important. Everybody wore their Class A's out there, but you're exactly right. When we got to the train station, it was about 2 hours late. The train getting into Kansas City. And so, if we would have came from St. Louis, if the Kansas train coming to Kansas City would have been on time, we would have missed the train. When we got to the train station, we got there a little bit early. We were the only crew there, but over time, it was amazing to see at least probably over 100 scouts were getting on the train there in Kansas City at Union Station. Some of them came from St. Louis that rode I guess a bus out there. They had chartered a bus. We drove out there. Others were from the Kansas City area. We actually met a crew from the St. Louis area that did take the train from St. Louis. I caught them the next morning, and they were lucky because the train from St. Louis was late. So luckily the Kansas City train was late, and they linked up on time. But it was amazing. The last three cars on the train were all scouts that we saw on the way out there. Some had, like Class B uniforms on for their crew shirts, and others had the Class A's on. But it helped out a lot with, representing quickly who was the scout, so that as the train stations lined up and put all the scouts together in the trains, that was a bonus. The one thing, couple things I would say about the train was there's a lot of room. There's power outlets there at the seats, so bring your, for the phones if people want to talk, text, charge up before you get out there for cameras, things of that nature. That was a bonus. Be ready for the outlets. I would say also bring some games. There's a viewing car on the train. where we were on a double decker car sitting on the second deck looking out, but the viewing car was there. We were able to look out, and then there's tables in the viewing car. So scouts went in there and they played cards in other games. We just had cards, so they were ready for the trail. They were able to play those games, but they had other games that would have been an opportunity to do things to pass the time on a pretty long train ride. But we got to sleep throughout the night, and then arrived there the next morning. So from my seat, it was by far and away the best way to travel from that standpoint.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I bought two sets of train tickets in 2018 and 2020, and didn't get to use any of them. And so I'm glad to hear that. You also ran into one of my buddies from the Philmont Trek Talk group, Daryl Tadson. So, and he's from the St. Louis area. So it was just kind of a weird conglomeration of people on the train. So that's cool. Um, yeah, as far as up to getting all the process for Philmont, there's two different things. All the things that go into getting to that point, all the medical forms, all the um, pretty much everything you have to enter. That's one part of it, and then there's the other part. Once you get to Philmont, all the stuff that you have to do in a short amount of time. Um, Give me an idea that some things that you would recommend before you get to Philmont, and then some of the things that you guys found that would be helpful after you got to Philmont, wading through the process.
So I can't say enough about the Philmont Gateway. We uploaded our information in the Philmont Gateway, the health forms, our travel plans. We actually had our crew. Some drove and some rode the train, and Philmont looked at the travel plans on there and contacted me just to clarify how many seats we would need on the shuttle going from the Raton train station over to Philmont. So you're as your lead advisor, one of the things you're trying to make sure you have everything ready to go for your crew. So when you get there, it's a pretty smooth process, and you can move along on the trail, and things like wilderness first aid, allergies, health forms, travel plans. There's a lot of things that you're trying to make sure is balanced to make the trek as smooth as possible. And the Philmont Gateway is a great great success story, I would say, from my standpoint. Not because of what I've done, but because of the opportunity it provides to be able to load that information in and have that confidence that you have all your information out there. And I can definitively say when we got there, it made easier too for our check-in day. So use that gateway, populate what you can early on, and that's really important. One of the things from the check-in day, there's a variety of steps that you do, and for us, we got there a day early, and we got there a day early, really to acclimate to the altitude, which was important. But as we went through the first day of check-in, I'm really happy that we got through the day in early, because that first day of check-in is a pretty full day, where they're moving you through a lot of stations. And we saw some crews that arrived there late from their travel plans on their check-in day. And really you arrive a day early. That's before you start your trek, but day one is your check-in day. And if you get there later in the day, it's a lot of catch-up time in terms of taking care of your medical evaluations, making sure your forms are there, paying any outstanding fees, things of that nature. And we were able to do some of those the day we arrived, which was pre day one, and then on day one. We were able to go throughout our day. Patience is the big thing, I'd say. You move through a variety of stations. Philmont has a well organized process, but just have patience as your ranger takes you throughout the various stations. And it's really kind of like a round robin approach. There's multiple crews checking in, so some will go to med check first, some will go to program first, some will go to logistics first, so on and so forth. But you're going throughout the day. You'll meet your ranger first thing. Your ranger will take you to the various stations throughout the day. One of which is a full shakedown of your gear, and really knowing what you have, what you don't have, what you can unload at that point in time is really important. So I would say throughout the day, the biggest thing is to have patience, to trust the process. They're going to get you through the full process, and then at the end of the day, you'll know what you need that you're going on the trail with, and then you'll know what you need that you can do without, and you can put that in the locker. From my own personal experience, and I can tell you that for the adult lead advisors on there, put as much emphasis into preparing your readiness for your health check as you do with your equipment that you go through the process. Once you get on the, once you get to that altitude, Philmont checks for the adults blood pressure, height, weight, things of that nature, and my blood pressure went up a little bit before we got on the trail, and I attribute that to the altitude out there. So I spent a little time clearing that and then the med check before we went out on the trail. So as much time as you spend getting your gear ready, planning for the trek, make sure make sure you're healthy and ready for the trail at that point in time as well. So that's an important readiness step for everybody. I'd encourage.
Awesome. Did you guys have any problems with altitude?
We did not actually. So, we hiked a couple different peaks. Had a couple different altitude points, but no one had to go down. No one appeared to have the mumbles, the stumbles, or any level of altitude sickness or headache. So, it worked out well being there the day in advance.
Yeah, that's what I advised everybody. We did not come out there a day early on our trek in 2021, but we did some. Along the way, we kind of, as we went, I think we were at 5,000 feet the night before, and we got there, and it really wasn't a big deal and didn't have any problem. But those of us flatlanders that are almost at sea level, I think we're at 300 feet or something. I don't know, 500. We're not very high. It's kind of tough. So, and it's impossible to train for that. So, um, was there anything at Philmont that you thought that maybe needs some work as far as the process, or the stores, or anything like that you found that maybe could be looked at for the next year?
So one of the recommendations that we collectively talked about from a adult lead advisor process was it was really the program areas. And here's some example I'll give you on that one. So we ended up doing horseback riding at Bobian, and one of the things when we arrived there the day early, we were able to check in. Were we interested in doing horseback riding? We said yes. We were able to get on the early horseback ride that day, and we had that program set up and ready to go. However, as we went through some of the various camps along the trail, by the time we got there, the programs were full for the day. Weren't enough spots, or we had missed it as we moved along. So I think that one of the recommendations I would have for Philmont is, as the crews are moving from trail to trail, or I'm sorry, from camp to camp, if there's a way we could sign up for program times before you go out on the trail, or before you leave one camp and move to the next camp, be able to sign up for those program times. That would give greater opportunity for crews to know, okay, this is the time I need to be there. Really ensure that they get the program time for that day, because it's frustrating for the scouts, even when they get up early and get started for the day, when they arrive at their next campsite, that they're not able to do the program that day. Some of the opportunities lend themselves to do program the next morning, but often not, because you're trying to getting up 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. You really want to be on the trail no later than 7 a.m. So the opportunity to catch a program the next morning is really limited. So I would say if either sign up for program times for each day, because you do a really good job of planning out all your camps throughout the time that you're at Philmont. And if you knew when your programs were by time, that would encourage the crew leader during their PLCs the night before to work with the other members of the crew to ensure they were getting up at the right time, getting on the trail, and they could meet that hike the next day. And it would encourage them to, as they look at their mileage, plan their time, and really develop and encourage that crew more. So that would be my biggest takeaway for Philmont, would be setting up for the and signing up for program activities, either while you're doing logistics day one to prep for the hike, or before you leave a campsite the night before, sign up for program at your next campsite. That's a little bit hard in the backcountry, I know, but that would encourage scouts more and help them in their planning process. That would be my biggest recommendation for Philmont.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that before you guys left, because we had that issue at Apache Springs, in the South Country, where we didn't get to do the 3D archery. We didn't realize that it was going to be full, and we were leaving the next day for fish camp, and we were told by several crews that along the way that, hey, you want to get to fish camp early, it will fill up, and so forth. So we left real early, and we were the first ones at fish camp that morning before they even opened up. But that's not something that you necessarily will know, that things are going to fill up. So That's why you come to Philmont to do the program. Otherwise, you could do a backpacking trip anywhere. So
And I appreciate some of the challenges Philmont had, as far as staffing levels, and then think so I understand there's always a challenge associated with it, but I think Philmont has some good processes, and they definitely capitalize on learning from feedback the year before.
exactly, that's got to be a tough thing for logistics, getting all that done. So um, we all know the major high adventure bases around the country, and they offer some awesome programs. Have you been searching for a cool alternative from your typical high adventure trip? As a scout leader, I want to give our scouts some great alternatives. You need to check out highadventurescouting.com. You'll find information on over 30 different council high adventure bases in 24 states. Maybe you're looking for a do it yourself option and need some ideas. Maybe you've taken a great trip and you want to share your good fortune with your fellow scouts and scouters. Just send us the details and we'll publish your trip. Whatever your interest, highadventurescouting.com is the one-stop shop for all things high adventure. That's highadventurescouting.com. Now, I'm curious on equipment. You guys tried a bunch of different stuff out. We talked a lot before. I think I did a shakedown with you guys of what we took with us. Very minimal. So when you guys got there, what worked, what didn't, what challenges did you guys have on the trail?
So, from a equipment standpoint, we ended up using a couple obvious things. We use the Philmont large pots. So we brought the crew the troop pots out there, but we ended up using the two large Philmont pots, and we did use compressed gas back there, and that worked out well. We ended up going through just under 4 canisters while we were there. And we packed enough in that we were okay. But one of the important things is when you're in the backcountry, look for when not just the commissaries don't help you, but you have to find a trading post in the backcountry if you're going to need to resupply with compressed gas in the backcountry. So you can get quite a few boils out there. So we were comfortable with just under 4 of those medium-sized canisters. But if you're going to do that, watch where your last trading post stop is if you want to resupply a little bit on a canister in the backcountry. And then there's places, if you run out of canister while you're out there, they'll recycle those at the trading post as well. So that'll give you a chance to get rid of those. A couple different things. One of the things that I picked up on the shakedown was, I dropped the number of clothes that I brought with me pretty significantly. I ended up having a pair of pants that were zip off, just shorts, and 2 long sleeve shirts. I packed an extra short sleeve shirt going out there, and extra pair of shorts. And one of the things during shakedown was, where can you reduce weight? And I went with a pair of 1 zip off pants, 2 long sleeve shirts, and then a pair of shorts and a t-shirt for sleeping. And that was ideal from weight. So that helped me reduce some weight a little bit. We had 2 6-liter bladders out there from when we went to the dry camps. One of the things I would recommend crews look at is not necessarily the big bladders for when you're going to go to the dry camps, but take each one of the crew members and add an extra liter to their pack, so that when you go to a dry camp, everybody's got a little bit more water and you distribute it across. When we took those bladders, they were when they were full, they were heavy and they were awkward, and then trying to line them up on a pack was not always the easiest thing. But with 11 people in the crew, if all of us would have had an extra liter in there, and we could have taken a simple collapsible water container and put it in our backpack and not needed it till we were going to a dry camp, that would have got us 11 extra liters going into the dry camp night, and would have been the same thing as those 2 6-liter bladders. So really, that would have been an easy way to distribute at that point. And then the last one, it seems so simple, but I really learned it was hiking pole tips. I blew through the hiking pole tips on probably day 3 out there, which was it happened, but it was really kind of annoying when you hike something like Tooth Ridge, and your hiking poles got the tip broken through there, and they start getting caught in rocks, hung up along the way, pulled out of your hands, things of that nature. So from a personal gear standpoint, the hiking pole tips is something simple that I would just get one that has like a metal inside of it, so the tip won't necessarily punch through it on that one. That seems simple, but that's a good opportunity to, from a personal gear standpoint, I thought would be a bonus to bring along with you.
Man, you must have been rough on your poles. Holy cow. Dang. Yeah, I I didn't have a ton of problems with that. I had a little bit. I think I lost a couple in the mud. That was my issue. We had a lot of mud when we were there. Now I would definitely say on the jet boil, if you're going to use a jet boil as a crew, you can easily probably a kind of a to be able to use those big pots, just heat up the water in the jet boil and pour it in the pot, and that way you're not balancing that pot on the jet boil, which is not really meant for a big pot. So that's an alternative to do for those of you out there listening. If you're planning on using a jet boil, and that's kind of what our crew did. We had a smaller crew than Bryan had. We only had 8, so and those are things you just learn as you go, and so well, that sounds awesome. I didn't have much issues with equipment. I think what I took with me is something I would have taken anyway, because I had really honed it, my equipment and the crew equipment, as we did the. That's what the shakedowns are for. And I see so many people asking on the Philmont forums, what should we take? Should I take this or that? Or start paring it down on your shakedown hikes. When you go out on a even the early hikes, take what you're going to take. Don't just put rocks in there. Try to mimic what you're going to do. And I pared down a ton. I kind of took the same kind of things that Bryan said he took, especially the clothes. You're going to stink anyway, so it's not going to matter. You're going to be sweaty anyway. You just dry it out. And I think what I took more of was socks. I think I had 5 or 6 pair of socks because I like to change socks, so that was worth the weight to me. But I'm not going to tell you how many pair of underwear I took. Not many. So, but that's good. It's always good to find those kind of things out. So now Bryan was talking about they took a southern trek. Not everybody's going to take a southern trek. Some will take northern trek and do some other things. But I think the important thing is to know ahead of time what you're doing, where you're going, and did you guys prepare your crew for the campsites, or the trek itself, or where you're going to be, or activities, or anything like that?
So yeah, we did. And before we go there, I'm going to hit one more thing on the gear, on the crew gear, that was pretty interesting, and it's a fun fact. So boiling the pot took 28 minutes with the jet boil. We did a couple times where we boiled the we used the jet boils and made our dinner, and it took less than 10 minutes at that point in time. So you're exactly right. That was a big time saver. From the itinerary side of the house, we voted as a crew on what itinerary we wanted to take well early on. The scouts voted where they wanted to go, what itinerary they liked. Really, their big push was they wanted tooth of time. That was a lot of options available out there, and it was there's a lot of great resources to be able to narrow that down, tools for doing that. But we oftentimes came into conflicts with activities that were in North Country as opposed to activities that the boys wanted to do in South Country. And so we really had them prioritize what it is that they wanted to do most, and that hiking into camp from doing Tooth Ridge and hiking into camp from there was their number one priority. So that really helped them down select the camps, and then be able to identify where narrow down that list of treks. And we actually got the number one trek that we wanted, itinerary 12-19, which turned out to be an amazing trek. And so before we went, the crew really looked through where they were going, talked about a lot of the activities, what they were most excited about, fly tying and fishing, rock climbing, things of that nature. And one of the things, Rob, that you helped us with early on in that was to build out a sheet that showed where the boys were going, where the crew was going to move one day to the next, how far there was going to be hiking, gains and losses and elevation, total miles over the course, what to expect from an activity standpoint on the next one. And that was really important because we laminated that. You helped us laminate that, and we passed it out to everybody going on the trail. And the key there that was really beneficial for the scouts was, and I would say from the adult leaders too, is what's the next day look like? How many miles am I going to have to hike? What are we going to be doing over the course of the next day? And if you had one person that had that, that's a whole lot of questions to ask on a daily basis. So kind of really thinking what you're coming the next, what's coming up the next day, what am I going to do the next day, and what kind of activities do we have planned, and kind of mentally prepare yourself for how far you had to hike, or hey, what day do we get the shower on, because that's a really important activity for everyone, and it's really refreshing when that comes. Or am I going to go to a dry camp the next day, and do we need to prepare ourselves from a water standpoint, extra water to carry, who's going to have those, or if you're going to a dry camp, moderate your consumption over the course of the next day. And that allows everybody to manage themselves individually, but also look out for each other as a crew from that standpoint. I can say though that the sheet that you helped us build was based off the Philmont one, and Philmont often says, be prepared to hike more miles than what we advertise. And after day three, the boys lost all confidence in the mileage on the sheets. So we we had our first day's hike ended up being from base camp. We went to the Kit Carson Museum and hiked up the Toothache Springs. Toothache Springs starts off with a almost vertical hike at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on an open road trail. And when I say open road, there's no shade. It's at almost the hottest part of the day. We went in June, so it was it was probably over 90 degrees at that point in time. And your first camp was a dry camp, and so you're starting off leading Kit Carson with bladders in hand, 2 6-liter bladders, the crew is working on where are we gonna hang those off a backpack, water sloshing, kind of bounces back and forth. And so you learn quickly how to work through that piece and how to conserve water, because again, like I said, that's a dry camp, and then the next day, where are you pressing on to? So you need to prepare for that. And I want to stay on that water theme for a second, because we did go to Toothache Springs that night, made it up the hike. It was a beautiful location. Worked with the ranger on cooking dinner for that night. He showed the crew how to cook, how to clean, set up camp, bear bags, things of that nature. And as we left camp, we went down the trail a little bit, about half mile, and there was everybody, it was we had filled up the day before on water, used it to cook and clean that night. And using the two pot method at Philmont, you use a pretty significant amount of water when you're cooking and doing dishes that night. And so it was desired to be, or expected to be, a pretty short hike the next day. And so the question was raised to the crew, do we hike an extra mile up a hillside to get water before moving on to the next site, or do we drive on to our next campsite with the water that we had? And smartly, the crew voted to go up the hill and get some more water. And I say that worked out well smartly, because we ended up finding ourselves on a game trail that day, on the way from Toothache Springs over to Carson Meadows. And what was only supposed to be a few hikes to our next stop off point ended up being about 5 miles. We went down a game trail, went about 5 miles. As everyone's well aware, there were wildfires recently at Philmont, and so as you're following the trail, you see a road intersect going east west, and it turns out that was a recently cut fire break, assumed to be a road, but it's recent fire break, and that sets you off on another path. And so it ended up being a couple more miles before we got to our next stop. And so wisely, the scouts made the decision to have get that water. And when we by the time we made it to Abreu, we still had water, but that don't cut short on the water fill-ups when the opportunity presents themselves.
Well, I like the idea of using an extra water bottle instead of the bladders. Yeah, that's a great idea, because you could get a 1 liter platypus, and in fact I carry one in my pack at all times, just in case, and it doesn't weigh anything. It's like 3 ounces or 2 ounces or something. So that's a really good idea. I hadn't even thought about that. I'll add that to my list for next time. So that's cool. Yeah, you really have to watch some of the trails, and it's really easy to get off if it's not marked as well. And you guys started off at a disadvantage, because you were supposed to stay at Zastro, which they uh, that wasn't even around. That was part of the fire, and so they Toothache Springs was kind of an add on. So, and and when you're talking about the those sheets that helped you guys put together, part of that was, in fact, I will post a link to the troop that puts those together. And they actually put together a spreadsheet that lists, each trek, how far it is, from one to the next, what's the cumulative miles, what are you going to do each day, what kind of, is it a staff camp, is it a trail camp, is, what's the average walking rate. I mean, it's pretty detailed. So I can't take credit for that part of it, but I did kind of update some of the stuff with our information on there. And then the other side was the a smaller version of the Philmont um, information they give out on all the treks. So front and back, the all the information that you're going to need. So it was, we did that last year. Just something came out of my head, and I thought, why not? I kind of want to have something I can put in my pocket. I can pull out anytime I want, and I can't tell you how many times I use that. It probably, at least a couple hundred times I'd pull it out and look at it. Even on a 12-day trek, you forget where you're at. So yeah. So, well, what else have we? I mean, we just wanted to give a good overview of, for a new advisor or somebody who's going in the next couple of years. What else do you think that we haven't covered that might help an advisor?
So one of the things that as we were preparing to go to Philmont, the prep work that we did, you focus a lot on the gear. You focus a lot on the mileage that you're going to hike. We were able to do a couple things that I think worked out really well. We encouraged our whole crew to go to wilderness first aid, so the majority of the crew made it to the same wilderness first aid training on a given day, and that was a good team building activity for the crew to go through that together. We also one of our hikes, we incorporated shotgun shooting out there. Kind of like you hiked for the day, and then that was a program in the afternoon following the Philmont theme. So it wasn't just hiking for the sake of hiking, but you get them, you get the scouts in the mindset of what it's going to be like at Philmont. One of the other things that I would really encourage, and as plans are built, is how can you work on team building skills with the crew well in advance. Try to find situations, because one of the things with Philmont is, over time, Philmont demands that the crew works together. And there's challenges, whether it's the duty roster for the day, a long hike, getting to that program in the evening. The weather doesn't cooperate as expected. It's too hot, it rains, something of that nature. And so Philmont will demand that the crew works together. And if you can work through team building events early on in your prep activities to challenge that crew, force the crew leader to become comfortable in their position, force the wilderness guia or your chaplain's aide to step into their roles of building the team of the crew, or working through nature on the way. That's definitely an opportunity that I would encourage advisors, as you prepare your plans going into it, is how can you challenge the crew? How can you create a little artificial stress in the crew to force some of that forming, storming, norming, and performing there within the crew. And then if you can work through that early on, that'll help form that group a whole lot faster whenever they get on the trail. So those team building activities would be something not to don't minimize that. It's fun to talk about crew gear. It's fun to talk about the activities that you're going to do out there. But the dynamics of that crew, from a lead advisor role, being able to see how those dynamics are going to play out, and foster that early on is important. And then once you get on the trail with that, you can do what you're supposed to do and take a step back and yield to the scouts, and they'll end up working through it whenever you get on the trail. That's if I was to help build a sheet for a follow on crew, which I'm going to put in the lessons learned book that we're going to add with Troop 85. Everything that you passed on to me, Rob, and now I'm building this up for the next person that leads a crew, is taking a straw man outline of your crew trek planning, and to build in some of those teamwork activities so the scouts can work together before they get there.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, and there is so much that you can kind of learn from the last person, and then they can learn from you. And this is a big trip. It's a lot of prep work, a lot of going through things, and frankly, we only have boys in our troop, but we watch the boys go from boy to young men to even more mature from the start of the process to the end, because they really learn how to overcome challenges, because there's always challenges. Uh, Probably the one thing I would add to the training regimen to make everybody a little more prepared is training in rain. That's one thing that we didn't do. We had a quite a bit of rain when we were out there, and not that we weren't prepared, but it would have been good to have that kind of stress, like you were talking, putting some stressor on the crew. That would have been good for our crew, and frankly, you're going to get rain out there at some point, so it's good to have that kind of training. So, well, Bryan, I want to thank you for taking time and kind of giving your perspective on right after your trek was over. And thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks, Rob, for having me. I could tell you it was a great experience. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I know the scouts had a great time out there, and I maybe not this year. I won't do it again, but down the road, sometime down the road, I think this would be a great opportunity to try one more time. Thanks, Rob.
No problem. No problem. Well, thank you. I want to thank Bryan King for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. And remember to tell your friends about this podcast. You can find us online at highadventurescouting.com, on Facebook or Instagram. If you have any questions or ideas for future podcasts, just email us at info@highadventurescouting.com. This podcast and website are independent and not affiliated with any youth organization. Happy high adventure! This has been a production of High Adventure Resources, 2019. All rights reserved.